Because you've always taken such charge.
Llegó justo antes del aguacero.
You are listening
to the Border Chronicle.
Welcome to the Border Chronicle podcast, where we bring news and analysis from the Borderlands. I'm Caroline Tracy, a reporter and editor with the Border Chronicle, as well as the author of Salt Lakes and Unnatural History. Today, we're bringing you a conversation with Lydia Otero. Lydia is a writer and historian from Tucson, Arizona. Their most recent book is Storied Property, María Cordova's Casa. Lydia's work explores the history of urban renewal in Tucson and the experiences of and resistance to it by Mexican and Mexican-American residents. In addition to being a trained historian and former professor at the University of Arizona, Lydia has written 2 memoirs about their experience growing up in Tucson during the period of highway construction and displacement, and about being a part of gay and lesbian Latino organizing in Los Angeles in the 1980s. Lydia and I discussed their life history and how it led them to write these 4 books. It's a great listen also for anyone who might be interested in doing similar research into the history of their own community. Now, here's our conversation. Great. Well, I thought I would just start off maybe asking you, you were born and raised in Tucson, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Tucson, yes. It's unusual, right? Because that was 71 years ago this month. So it is a milestone. And I was born on Arizona Statehood Day, too. So as a kid, you know, it was either, okay, you're born either on Valentine's Day and, you know, or Statehood Day, and Arizona Statehood Day. So I took a lot of pride in that I shared a birthday with Arizona. And being gender non-binary, you know, Valentine's was the worst day I could have been born in because I was dressed up as a girl. My mother totally dug all those kind of frilly, curly, heart-shaped things. So, yeah, I love saying I was born on Arizona Statehood Day, which is interesting because now looking back 71 years ago, and then looking up at, you know, at the 60s when I had formulated thoughts, you know, when I was like 6 onward, that I would become a writer who writes about Arizona, writes about Tucson. So that's all interesting, how the cosmic world puts together these realities for people. And mine has a lot of, my life has a lot of, like, I like to call coincidences, but sometimes I wonder if they're more meaningful and I'm just not taking them into account.
Right. Yeah. I know that you write about your childhood in Tucson in the shadow of the freeway, but that's the book of yours that I have not read. So maybe can you talk about what Tucson was like in those days?
Yeah, right. So it was smaller, right? And it was, but it's odd, but my family didn't have a car. So it was possible to still survive in Tucson without having a car. And we walked everywhere. We walked downtown. We were like 1.25 miles from downtown. So walking downtown was very much a reality. So that was like the big place, like the place of wonder where you had retail, and it was small retail, but it was where you buy stuff. And when they had bikes there at the Western Auto, and certainly, and they had all these cool toys downtown. So I didn't realize how small it was, but my reality, my lived reality was small, was real immediate, mostly with family and my neighborhood. In that book, another thing that would have predicted, or maybe that is a coincidence, as to who I become, because I've written about urban renewal. And when I was a child, the neighborhood that I lived in, which was then Barrio Cougar Lane, most of those houses, and a lot of my cousins lived in those houses, were removed to make room for the freeway. So here I am, not even 6, and already I'm seeing the demolition of a neighborhood, witnessing it, right? Seeing people having to live with the fact of my cousins and my neighbors are leaving here and moving somewhere else for this freeway that forms this barrier and then blocks us from walking downtown as much as we used to. Like we, instead of, there were no overpasses, there were no walking underpasses, so we had to walk all the way to 22nd Street to walk over. So there was like no crossing. And so it was a different reality, that freeway. And I had to live with it for the rest of my life. In fact, the house that I was born and raised did survive, and it's still there. And sometimes I drive through there and it's just noisy as hell, because it's like just traffic intensified exponentially. So it's like, wow, I got used to all that. But when and now that I live near a mountain, which I can still hear background noise, but not as intensely as that. So all the dangers, all the environmental dangers, toxins of the freeway, I made peace with. And then, as I said, 50 years later, I write about that, about being a kid and witnessing that. Also, being a kid and being in a school district that had really low expectations and didn't expect a lot from people like me and from the neighborhoods. And so that made for a great first memoir, because then I wrote a second memoir, and maybe you read the one about me when I moved to LA, because being brown and queer in Tucson, Arizona in 1973 was not possible for me. Even my mother understood that if I was going to she said that way, and what she meant was be out and be, not willing to compromise my identity and my desires, then I had to leave. So I ended up in Los Angeles, and then wrote the second memoir. So I've written 2 memoirs. The second memoir in LA is interesting for a variety of reasons, right? But one of them is that I worked as a construction worker. I was an electrician in IBEW building. And I don't know, I think it takes time for me to realize why I was attracted to certain things. And really, Caroline, when you get to be my age, you reflect on these things a lot. Did I gravitate toward wanting to make things and build things because during my childhood, I had witnessed so much being torn down. Not only my neighborhood for what became the I-10, but I also witnessed downtown being torn down during what we call urban renewal, and to build what we call now the Tucson Convention Center. So was it like me as a child growing up, seeing all this and then wanting to be something that a builder or maker? And I still think I'm a builder and a maker because I love the books that I make. Like, I love writing them, and that's truly a pleasure, but I also like making them. I like deciding where the photos go, each photo. I love making up the captions. I work with a typesetter who helps me out, right? But I'm the lead. I lead that process by saying, this goes here, this is the caption I want. This page looks awkward, make sure you put this photo to follow this paragraph. So I see books as a construction project, but soft construction projects, and a builder and a maker, maybe that comes from, like I said, my childhood.
That's a really interesting reflection. I hadn't made that connection at all. I have read L.A. Interchanges. That was the next thing I was going to
Yeah.
ask you about. That I remember that you worked as an electrician, and I think you say you worked on the L.A. Central Library. Is that right?
Yes, I was after the fire in 1986 at the Central Library. I got called, and I did I actually worked building the shelving that moves, and it's electric. And you press the button and they move. So it increases the shelves and the storage. Uh, and I worked in special collections, and it was a great job. I loved working there, and I was so excited because when I worked as a construction worker, I loved working on historic spots. Like I loved working on the Coliseum, uh, and I love working and building the metro rail that between Union Station and MacArthur Park, and just being in MacArthur Park, all of those historic spots. I love to be part of that team that worked on those places. And what's again one of those coincidences is that in 2003, I donated all my documents in my archive to the LA Central Library, which is held in special collections that I
That's
helped
perfect.
uh, put together after the fire. So when I first went to meet the chief archivist, I knew where I was. I knew when I got off the elevator, I was going to turn right, and I knew where she was taking me. So it was very bizarre because I knew it so well because I had worked on it and helped build it and make it. I also on the third floor, I think it's the third floor. One of the main things, and it's not in the book, is I was the electrician assigned to wire and put together the puppet theater. So
Oh,
that was
that's
really
cool.
cool. Yeah,
That's really neat. That's cool.
yeah,
And that book also talks a lot about like feminist and queer organizing that you were
right.
involved in LA. Can you talk about what that was like at that time?
Well, yeah. Um, it was landing in LA, knowing that I was brown and queer, feeling mm, very firmly and in my body and soul that we call it intersectionality now, right? That I couldn't separate my brown self from my queer self. So I got involved in a lesbian group because back then in the 80s, I was a lesbian. So I have that history. And that was the only identity really that was available to me and the closest to me and the one that I affiliated with. So I joined a group called Lesbians of Color, late 70s, early 80s, and was active in that group. And then in 83, I joined and became part of Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos. And so meeting people like me and really resonated. It was really exciting and affirming to my identity, where I thought growing up, maybe I'm the only one. Are there people like me? And all of a sudden, hey, you're in a ballroom full of people just like you. And it was like numbers and it was just excitement. It was party, but it was also very much a serious side to it too, because, mm, uh, HIV AIDS hit in the latter part of the 80s and then Glue organized to around providing HIV services and also public service information around HIV, AIDS in Spanish. And we eventually formed, and I was at the leadership. I was a leader in this move to form Bienestar, an HIV/AIDS project that's still around in LA and is has a couple offices, and so it's done really well. So I'm very proud of that. The party part and the connecting with people is that are those ingredients that really move me and touch me. But the fact that I built something that was lasting and that's still there is just something that just means a lot to me. I think that way too about um, each of my books. Like I think that I wouldn't write these books, and if I didn't think they were important, if I didn't think there was something in them that was going to be lasting, and and since we're talking about writing, which since I'm bringing up writing, I really do think that as writers, we don't write a book that we don't think other people won't want to read. Like when I'm writing it, I think maybe it's a survival thing, or maybe it's necessary. But when I'm writing, I think, oh yeah, people need to know this, or people are gonna want to know this, and it's just one of those internal conversations that writers have with themselves. Otherwise, we wouldn't write. But as an activist, I don't know that I was engaging in those activities because I thought people are going to remember them. It's very immediate. We have to do this and we have to move in this direction. There was no choice, which was very different than writing.
Right, writing, you're thinking on this kind of longer time scale, and maybe you believe in your heart that people are going to want to read the book, but they don't know it yet. You know, that the book has to exist before they realize how much they want to read it. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, so if you're listening to this, you need to read my books. I'm telling you now, because when I was writing these books, I was thinking, oh, people need to know this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then maybe we can shift to that, because I know at the end of your time in LA, you come back to Tucson and become a historian. And how did that
Right.
happen?
Well, so I was working at the Coliseum in 1994, and I got injured. Somebody working overhead was using a big heavy sandblaster, dropped it, fell on my head, and I got knocked out and suffered neurological damage where I have problems with my hands, my thumbs, my neck. And so I had to find something to do that didn't require using my body, and so that's when I decided to go into academia. I had returned to get my master's degree. I received it in '92, and then I was going part time to get a master's degree in history. So I was already moving in that direction, not thinking ahead that you better move in this direction because you're gonna something big, some huge instrument is going to fall on your head. I never thought that, but I was always thinking that you're getting older and you're not going to be able to use your body the way you're using it now, and you should have options. So when that happened, I had that already in mind, but I didn't think it was going to, I had it in mind. So I'm very blessed that the world or the energies out there work with me, and I'm also a hard worker. I'm very dogged about when I want something, I'll work really hard on it. And I say that because graduate school is very hard. Entering a PhD program is very, very hard. I mean, it's like you have to appease your professors. You have to agree sometimes when you want to disagree. You have to replicate thoughts and ideas that you don't agree with, and actually mold yourself into that system of academia that boxes you in a way that I've never felt in my life other than graduate school, or in the PhD program there that I attended at the University of Arizona. But I survived, and in 2003, my focus of that work was urban renewal in Tucson. And in 2003, when I got my PhD, there was a position open in Mexican American Studies here at the U of A. And I was working on Tucson. And I just said that. I was working on Tucson, but they didn't have anybody that specialized in Tucson. And so I was at the right place at the right time, because the chair at that time had been hearing from the advisory committee, hey, how come you don't have people that study us? How come you don't have people that work on books that highlight what happened in Tucson? So he had that in mind already when I show up. And so I was able to get that position, and I was there for 20 years, and I left, and I took incentivized retirement in 2019.
Wow, that was the right place at the right time.
Right time. Yeah. I'm not too happy about my time there, but
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have trouble with academic,
yeah.
working with the institutions.
hmm But in that time, Caroline, I wrote La Calle, which is one popular. I mean, a lot of people in Tucson and across the country have read it, right? Because it's about urban renewal and Mexican American community, and it's downtown. But it was the first of its kind, raising some these ideas of, you know, not just writing in a way that was, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then ignoring how people feel, ignoring the consequences of this destruction. So I think that La Calle, released in 2010, does that. And so I think that was something very positive about my time in the academy, that I was able to produce that and get supported for producing that. And
Yeah,
so
oh, sorry, go on.
so when I left, I had that platform that Lydia Otero is the writer of La Calle. And so I was able to do what I do now because I have that readership and because I have that support.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that most people I talk to in Tucson that are aware of the destruction that happened to make the convention center, they know about it because of La Calle. It's really, you know, it's planted a really important piece of Tucson history of people's understanding of the city.
Right, right. I get that too. And it's very beautiful. And so it's been out, what, 15 years? And that's a long time, but in book years, not so much. It still has time to travel.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it was like when I first moved to Tucson, I mean, within a week, someone asked me, "Oh, have you read La Calle?"
Yeah.
Of course, I hadn't, so I was like, I better go do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how did you decide to write that book?
La Calle. So, and when I left for LA, since I had grown up going to La Calle, being excited by all of what La Calle had to offer, by seeing how my parents were so connected to La Calle, I had lived that, I had experienced that. So when I left in 1973, the Tucson Convention Center was already built. In fact, I worked for a short time selling snow cones in the big arena, like for 2 summers, for Disney on Parade. How crazy is that?
That is
Then I
crazy.
write like I, right? So I sold snow cones for Disney on Parade for 2 summers when I was in high school, and but when I left for LA, and I returned to Tucson often to visit my mother, and I drive through there, and it just felt wrong. It just felt really wrong. And then I'd go back to LA, forget about it, right? And then I'd come back, and it just felt wrong. And I think that's one of the advantages I had, because sometimes when you see something every day, you normalize it. When it becomes part of your reality, you normalize it. So since I moved away, the Tucson Convention Center and all those buildings, and didn't that I always felt like was just not what I remembered that area being. Was just important in picking a dissertation project, and also like providing that perspective that's in the book, which is that this was a mistake, this was misuse of power, this was all of these things, was something that I had felt as a child, but articulated as an older adult that had gone into academia. Because I mean, I did go into a PhD program until I was 42, so that is much older. So I didn't really have to think about topics for my dissertation. I knew what it was. And so that book is Urban Renewal, the 80 acres south of City Hall. A lot. I mean, that's a lot of homes, like over 250 homes, and a lot of people displaced. It's big scale uh, 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 demolition and removal. And when I finished that book, I thought there were 2 things that I needed to do. One of them is to put together a compilation of Alba Torres's articles that were used in the end of La Calle, when I wrote about La Placita Committee, because she was very inspirational to me when I was writing that. And I'm like, oh my God, she's writing what I would write. She's saying what I would say. So then I thought, I need to put a book together just of her articles. And I also thought, hey, this person, Maria Cordova, she needs some attention. There's a story here, and I need to get to that one day. So I finally got to compiling that book of notitas. It was my book, what I worked on during COVID when we were on lockdown. I looked through her articles, and selected the articles to put together into a compilation, and it's titled Notitas. I give Alba full writing credit because she wrote the articles. I just give myself credit for compiling them. And then more recently, and so that book was released, I think, 2021. And more recently, I followed up with the Maria Cordova book that was released 4 months ago.
Yeah, I want to get to that momentarily. I just thought that maybe for people who are listening who aren't familiar with the story of La Calle, maybe could you talk about what happened in Tucson and how it kind of fits into what was going on nationwide in terms of urban renewal?
Yeah, well, it there's urban renewal in Boston. There's urban renewal in different places, mostly centered on the East Coast in Chicago. Um, we don't look at urban renewal in places like Tucson because we consider them new environments. So why did you have to implement urban renewal in a place like Tucson that's relatively new? Now, I'm not saying that, but that's how people look at that, because Tucson is a very old community, right? And urban renewal wasn't implemented in Los Angeles. People say, well, it was Dodger Stadium. They tore down the community built Dodger Stadium, but that's not federally funded urban renewal. That was the O'Malley's. It was a different kind in the city. So it was a different dynamic. But here in Tucson, you have urban renewal monies available, and you do have an old community, the adobe homes that had been built between 1870 and 1920, and they look, well, they're the adobe row houses, right? And so you had a lot of people saying, Tucson really looks like a Mexican place. And so you have these boosters and planners and people that are influential in planning and who really are thinking about remaking Tucson. And it's their opportunity to tear down these 80 acres of homes that are adobe homes and that look like a place in Mexico. And it looks so much like a place in Mexico that during the 1930s, you had Hollywood filmmakers who were hesitant to go to Mexico, who came and filmed their movies here in Tucson, in La Calle, because they wanted the backdrop to look like a Mexican pueblo. So that's how Mexican it looked.
Oh my
So
gosh.
so all of that was destroyed and intentionally. You have the big names who, like Roy Drachman, who was the main leader of urban renewal, who had a lot of power, and his real estate buddies, his promoter buddies. I mean, you had all these coalition of powerful people pushing this agenda, and in fact, everything's torn down. They tore down. They started leveling and bulldozing the place before they had gotten funding to build anything.
Wow.
That's how unjust all of this was. I mean, you can see unjust because that they were just motivated by tearing it down. Not really by building something, but by tearing it down. And these federal monies coming in gave them that opportunity.
Wow. Yeah.
Progress is a weird animal. It's a weird thing. How it motivates people, how it skews people's perspective is just amazing to me. But it's not shocking to me. But it's hard for me as a writer sometimes to write because the sentence would be the dominant population was motivated by progress. See, that's just too simple because there's just so much in this idea of progress, and it's it has to be shared, it has to be disseminated, has to be agreed upon, and there has to be, well, yeah, the consensus around it. But sometimes there's danger in that, and we see it in all of these things, and we're seeing it now, right? But uh, yeah, that's one of those words that I use a lot in my writing, but that sometimes it's just really hard to explain.
Yeah, definitely. And can you explain also why was that area called La Calle?
Because that's what we called it as kids. That's what my neighbors called it as kids. So it just means more public, the street. So in Spanish, it means la calle means the street, right? And it's I think that in English we could look at it as people like being in the streets and being in public. So it's more of a public sphere, public environment. And of course, you'd want to be in La Calle because that's where things were happening.
Yeah.
From your private home and you go to somewhere where it's happening, and it was happening in La Calle. And sometimes I would be at home, my mother would be with her sisters, and they would be at La Calle, and somebody would come and say, ask me, ¿Dónde está la chita? And I remember saying, Se fue a la calle. It didn't need an explanation because they knew where she was. And sometimes I remember my uncle says, La voy a ir a buscar. And so it was that easy, right? It's like, she's in la calle, I'm going to go look for her, because it was like everybody knew everybody, and they knew that my uncle knew that eventually he'd run into my mother and his other sisters.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because now you say that, that makes me think like when you're speaking Spanish and you want to say like I was out and about or I was outside, you say like estaba en la calle.
Yeah,
And
right.
then it's almost like, but when you go out and about, of course, there's one place you would go, and so it
Yeah.
gets the name. That's
Right, right.
interesting.
It is
That's
a
neat.
very
Yeah.
public-private kind of
Yeah.
split. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, and so your most recent book talks about one specific area of the urban renewal that took place in Tucson, which is the Tucson Museum of Art block.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, why that is unique relative to the rest of the project?
So when I started writing this project, I didn't know how unique it was going to be, but it was. Now I'm convinced that it's the most important structure in Tucson. If you want to learn Tucson history, if you want insights as to how history works, how power dynamics works, you got to look at the history of this one house. Now, prior to that, I wouldn't have been convinced that it was one house could tell this history, but now I am, because this is one house that used to sit inside the presidio. Not the entire structure now known as La Casa Cordova, right? But the back rooms, the west rooms of the house. Maria Cordova comes on the scene in 1940. She meets a newspaper reporter. I don't know if he looked for her. She looked for him. And she says, hey, this house here, it's important to history. And it was built before the Gadsden Purchase, and it was built before 1854. Now, just a random mujer from Mexico, right, speaking with a thick accent, saying that probably didn't mean that much to that reporter. And in fact, that reporter blew her off.
Right, because maybe he was like, of course Mexicans live in old houses or something like
Right,
that.
right. Yeah. And when you say old houses, I mean, there's old, but then there's like super old, right? Before the Gadsden Purchase, I mean, that would have made, but it didn't attract his attention. But the fact that she was saying that, and she's quoted in the papers saying that, is interesting because when the new book, Storied Property, is not a biography of Maria Cordova. It's mostly about what happened to her in her house. She takes a lot of pride in that house, tells that history many times. In fact, when I was writing the book, there was just too much from Maria because she cited and quoted in the papers so often that I didn't include all of it. But fast forward to the 1970s, and so that's 35 years later. in 75, La Casa Cordova opens in 1975. That she's telling this story in 1940, right? The preservationists who put that sign outside La Casa Cordova, right in the front, say this house was built before 1854. The preservationists say it's the oldest house in Tucson, and confirm it. And the only source of that information is Maria Cordova, which is trippy to me. She's not saying, because she owns two houses, right? She's not saying that house is the oldest house. She's saying this house is the oldest house in Tucson. That's why I live in this house, because it's the oldest house in Tucson and built in. And in 1940, when she's making this statement, there's no archaeological studies confirming that. There's no historians that are studying this and confirming that. The Ferguson map isn't even found. It's lost in some dusty storage place in the city of Tucson. They find it afterward and they say, what is this map? And that the Ferguson map, for those of you that don't know, was the map, what's called the first map of Tucson, and it was drawn in 1862. And lo and behold, her house is there. I mean, a portion of her house is there. So she must have known, and she was so absolute in that house was predated the Gadsden purchase. So she was knowledgeable. I mean, here you have a Mexicana woman. I don't want to call her Chicana because I don't think she would like that. She's very conservative. You have a Mexicana woman saying, this site is historical. This site is important. And she's saying that because she knows history. And just the fact that there is a woman in Tucson in the 1940s making that claim and knowledgeable about history, I mean, that is important. Is that as important as the house? Maybe to me it is, because I just think it's just the coolest thing. Because she didn't need to go to the university. She didn't need to read books. She knew this from the oral histories that were passed down from her aunt, Refugio. And she's making these claims. And she doesn't just keep it within her family, which she could have done, right? If she would have kept this narrative within her family, hey, this house is important, they would have talked about it at parties. They would have passed it on to the younger generation. That house would be destroyed now. Mm-hmm. The only reason that house was preserved was because Maria Cordova would take any opportunity to talk to her reporter and talk about this house.
It sounds like even before urban renewal was on the table. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, which is so cool, because there is a point during urban renewal when they want to tear down the house, and you have people from the dominant culture, which by that I mean white, coming to preserve the house, and they want the house to stand, and so they tell the architect who drew the plans that involved tearing down a portion of the house, hey, you can't tear down this house. You have to redraw these plans. Otherwise, we're going to stop donating to you and the TMA if you don't do that, because this house is historical. Now, the only person saying this house is historical is Maria Cordova. So the history of the house becomes really important. It becomes verified, legitimized in some way because of all the times she appeared in the paper and because people talked about it. But what happened at the end to Maria Cordova is the house became important. It was one of those things during urban renewal that needed to be saved. But Maria Cordova was disposable. She was not important. She and her family who gave that house life, and she who told the story, could be removed from the house. The house could be called La Casa Cordova and preserved, become part of the TMA historic block. And I think that she tried really hard to prevent that from happening because she wanted to stay in her house, right? But eventually, she was disposable, just like so much of the history there. And just like but the building wasn't, the architecture wasn't. So it's a I don't it's a tragic story in some way, but she was so defiant. She's just very interesting to me. And when I was writing the book, I was thinking, I wonder if she would like me. Part of me would say, don't care about that. Just like write this book, because we all as writers want to like get into these conversations with the people that we're writing about. And she's interesting because prior to my memoirs, I hadn't written about a person, so I wrote about myself a lot. And when I wrote about, I started writing about María Cordova right after La Calle, but I couldn't write that book. I was stuck, and I couldn't wrap my head around what that story would be because it was too hard. And it was like, okay, I just finished writing La Calle, which is about 80 acres and about power and this big thing, and I just can't write about a person. So I wrote the two memoirs, the compilation, and then later, after I write about myself, then I feel like I learned how to be a better writer. Yes, that's true for that. I'm a better writer now than I was, even 2 years ago. But that I was able to tackle it because this book, Storied Property, is complicated. There's a lot of like the whole issue with deeds, with history, with power, with colonization, settler colonialism. That's a hard one. Now, I don't want to turn off anybody that's listening, but I really do feel like we haven't, up to this point, there's been no writer or author that has tried to place Tucson within this settler colonialism framework. I tried to put it there, and I tried to include urban renewal in this settler colonial framework. And that was for me as a challenge, as a historian and a writer. I wanted to take up that challenge because I thought that those were the dynamics that were in play here.
Well, and I think you do a nice job of talking about the layers of it, because Maria Cordova is a character who comes from Mexico. So in Tucson, she's a Mexicana, but she has an understanding of her own whiteness that comes from her social class in Mexico. And so
Right.
for her, the way she saw herself was as a settler, I guess.
Yeah. And two, the way she comes from a privileged class. She plays the piano, and she speaks French. She paints. So I think that too, she expected some sort of like elevation in society that she's surprised that she wasn't going to find here once she moved to the United States. And so she tried harder to get that, but she knew how to do it. Because one of the things I make clear in my book, especially in the beginning, is that settler colonialism in Mexico is not that different from settler colonialism in the United States. Maria Cordova grew up in that power dynamic in Mexico, where and part of a family that had large land ownings, and those came from taking land away from Indians. I mean, make no mistake about it, they're not that much different. So she knows how important land is to respectability, the connection to respectability, land respectability, dignity, all of these things she knows because she grew up in that dynamic too. But she's smart. She's a strategist. She's really putting this all together. She knows what's going on, and she's putting together I can't tell you, I mentioned a couple lawsuits in my book, but I can't, and they were surprising to me how I admired the energies it took to put those tenets of logic together to put forth a lawsuit, and then one of the last lawsuit they was to fight eminent domain, and that they put some creative arguments out there too, because Maria Cordova stayed in her house until she had to leave. I tried to look up police reports. It's very hard to find people that were removed, despite the large number of people removed in the late 1960s in urban renewal. It's really hard to find those cases or those reports of where we went and knocked on this person's house to remove them.
Right.
I couldn't find that, and I tried really hard to look for that because it's important, and maybe it'll be found sometime. But it's really hard to get those kinds of records and get people to actually motivate people to just look a little deeper and a little extra, and on shelves they've ignored forever, or maybe they're not there anymore.
Right. Yeah, or maybe they were not documented by design or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good segue, though. Can you talk a little bit about your research process for research and writing, because not all of it comes from research. Some of it is memoir. What is the process you do to research your books?
So María Cordova is a different book. I see it as a La Calle and then the Cordova book, Storied Properties. The research for that is very archival, newspaper based. And with my memoirs, it's I call the last one an archival memoir because I'm a historian. I love looking at old documents, and so I try to include as many, like, do you want to know more? Like, I'll ask, here's an incident where, like, say HIV AIDS in the 1980s, where information to Spanish speaking folks wasn't being released, and or if it was released or publicized in a bad fashion. And I talk about it in the memoir, and I say, well, some of the billboards, you'd see hands, brown hands, and then the billboard would say, SIDA, which is AIDS, está en tus manos. And in Spanish, that translates like AIDS is in your hand. They wanted to say AIDS is in your hands. You can control its destiny, or you can stop it. That's what they're trying to say. But when you see a billboard, SIDA está en tus manos, it's like,
you're like, do I need to wash my hands?
So So then I say, well, if you're interested in more of this, you can go to these sources. And I think that adds another layer of complexity and engagement in my book, that people can, this is a memoir and this happened to me, but if you want to know more about these incidences or these major things that were influencing my chain of thought or my activities, go to these books, or go to these sources. And it keeps me as a writer engaged too, because, otherwise and then I did this and then they did that. And so I just totally dig it. So memoirs with footnotes is a new thing for me. Maybe it'll catch on, but it's my training too, because footnotes is just second nature to me. I just assume, just like I assume everybody is going to want to read this book, I just assume that everybody's going to want to know where I got this information.
Definitely. So you do sometimes research with other people's archives, and then sometimes it sounds like with your own archive that you've made.
Right. Yeah, because I've saved everything. My mother was an archivist and saved everything. That's where the Shadows of the Freeway is based on her archives. She helped me a lot. It's like she knew I was going to write a book one day, so she saved all these things. And like the new project that I'm thinking about moving toward is based more in Sonora, and so I'm just reading about Sonora right now and trying to learn more about the history of Sonora in 1823, around that time. And first I read a lot about that period and then I start like getting more specific. In this place, I'm looking at Rayon, Mexico in Sonora. And so then I read a lot, like Tinker Salas is a book on Sonora, and then just narrow it down. And I think that I'll have to travel to Rayon and go to Magdalena next year, maybe in October, November, because it's going to get hot.
Yeah.
October, November, it's gonna get cooler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had someone that I follow on Instagram in Hermosillo posted that yesterday was 39 degrees Celsius. That's like over 100 degrees in
Oh yeah.
Hermosillo yesterday.
Yeah.
It's already
I,
hot. So,
I
yeah.
missed my window of opportunity. But I have to ask you a question.
Go for it.
Okay. So when we met, we walked by to La Casa Cordova, and then we walked inside La Casa Cordova, and I gave you a little tour. But when you walked in front of the Casa Cordova, you said, I walk by here all the time. And then I said, my introduction is written for people like you that walk to this place all the time.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think the introduction even says people walk by it all the time without noticing it, and
right.
I said, "Oh, that was me. That
Yeah,
was definitely me." But hopefully, it's also many of the listeners of the podcast, and they'll realize what the place is and what the importance is.
yeah, yeah. I hope so, because uh, I mean, when we went that day, maybe it was a month ago. I mean, we couldn't find parking. I remember it was a day that was crazy, crazy with like, I couldn't find parking. You couldn't find parking. We both late. And yet, when we went inside La Casa Cordova, it was absolutely empty. Nobody
Yeah.
was leaving. Nobody was arriving. It was absolutely empty. And it troubles me that a place, the most important place, most important site in Tucson is ignored, because there's a level of responsibility, like civic responsibility, that we should hold and take into account when we think of La Casa Cordova, because it's representative of so many layers, as you said, but it's also representative of that place, that juncture where things change, where you have indigenous land, and then you have a structure that's there that provides us this portal for looking beyond what was there. So I think it's just, hopefully next time we go hang out, there'll be at least 2 or 3 people inside La Casa Cordova,
Yeah,
talking about its history. Yeah,
that would be
that is
great.
a possibility. It just takes time. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I think that would be a nice place to stop. I think that's a nice, hopeful note to end on. And so, thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you for interviewing me and for reading the book and talking about this book. Thank you. And my
My
other
pleasure.
books too.
Oh,
So
my
yeah,
pleasure. My
all
pleasure.
right.
And that does it for this episode. That was Lydia Otero, whose new book is called Storied Property. This episode was edited by Jose Olivares. If you like what you're hearing, please consider rating us on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other people find the show. You can also check out more of our work at theborderchronicle.com. We've got a brand new website, so please come check us out. Also consider becoming a paid subscriber. I'm Caroline Tracy, and this is the Border Chronicle podcast. See you next time.
Because you've always taken such charge.
Llegó justo antes del aguacero.
You are listening
to the Border Chronicle.